Hi guys and girls, thank you very much for joining me. Really appreciate your company. Today we've got some exciting news. I've got another lens to show you now. Just the other couple of weeks ago I did a video on a set of Viltrox lenses that I had purchased. I got them at a great price. They're on special, like $100 off. They're only a $500 lens at the outset anyway for Australian dollars, but with $100 off, made them $400 roughly each, and I couldn't help myself. I just had to grab the whole set. When I say the whole set, I've got the 20, 24, the 35, the 50 and the 85, and I'm shooting on the 50mm 1.8 Viltrox lens right now, so it gives you a good idea what it looks like for video and how it performs with autofocus, etc. So I'm very pleased with their results, and I'm very excited to continue using them because they're inexpensive and because they're nice and lightweight. They fit in the camera bag fantastic, and of course the other beauty of them is they're nice comfortable prime that's affordable, and if something gets damaged or broken or you get it lost or stolen, you can just buy another one because they're not that expensive at all. So you don't have to be fearful of high-end stuff getting knocked off when you're not looking, perhaps. And it's those applications where you're in the street photography arrangement, or you're doing something in a maybe a bit more dodgy neighborhood, maybe want to take your very expensive lenses with you. So that's an option. But right now we're talking about a new product that's exciting for me. It's been out for a little while, certainly with Sony mount, but it's just released a year or so ago for a Nikon Z mount, and that is this one here, which is the Tamron 35 150mm f2 to 2.8, and it's a Di3 VXD. It's for Nikon, so it's the Nikon Z mount one. And I'm really impressed with it, I can tell you. I'm very excited to have it, and I just showed you the box there, so you know I didn't knock it off out of someone's camera bag. I did actually buy one. And so this is it here, so I'm just illustrating it here. We've got some reasonable lighting to show you what it looks like on the camera. It's basically its volume and size. Now it does weigh quite a bit, but then so does the Z9. So what you're finding here is it's actually pretty good balance. It's a little bit heavier than a 24 to 70 2.8. But it's a little bit lighter than a 70 to 200. So when you sort of look at it in those sort of ballparks, it's actually sort of in the middle of both. And that's really what it's designed for. Tamron actually market it as that. They say you don't need to have a separate 24 to 70 2.8 and then also have a 70 to 200, and you've got two lenses and they're both expensive and you've got two to carry around and all that bulk and weight. Let's just do one lens that does everything. And that's basically what they've got here. It's a do-it-all lens all in one. Now, what are the advantages of this? Well, the advantages of the range of 35 to 150 is that you got most of the sweet spot of the 24 to 70. You miss out on the very wide end of that, but we'll come to that a little later on, a solution around it. And of course on the 70 to 200 front, well, you don't get the extra reach of 50 to 200, but then you do get the sweet spot of the 70 to 150 range, which is probably the range you use 90% of the time anyway. And this is what we're talking about here. We're not talking about does one lens actually do everything. No, there's no such thing. There's always compromises. Think about it this way. If you have a 24 to 70, you're compromising because you don't have extra reach, and that can be very frustrating. You're compromising with the 70 to 200 because you don't have the wide end and you've got to carry another lens around. There's some compromises there. If you were to buy, say, a 24 to 200mm lens, that's great, you've got a fantastic range, but then you've lost your aperture. Then you're getting down to, say, f4.5 to 6.3. It's getting a little bit dark and you're losing your shallow depth of field. So what do you do? Where do you have the perfect balance? Well, I think this is where this lens here is the perfect compromise for size, weight, performance, and the aperture. Now, the thing about the aperture with this lens that's very exciting is it starts off at f2. So it doesn't start off at 2.8 like the 24 to 70 would do. It's f2, so it's pretty much prime level arrangement there. Most primes start at 1.8. That's the average prime. I mean, you're sure you can get 1.2s and 1.4s, but generally the prime lenses have always been a standard of f1.8. f2 is no different to that. The marginal difference of that minor percent, it's incremental, you wouldn't even notice. In fact, sometimes I have my 1.8 lenses on, I've accidentally changed it to f2, and when I examine the images I couldn't tell any difference anyway. The brightness and the shallow depth of field is pretty much identical. So unless you're really pixel peeping, you wouldn't notice. So having f2 from 35 to around 50mm is fantastic. After 50mm it starts to drop off a little bit. So 50 might be 2.1, and then if you go to 70 it might be f2.4 and so on. So it's a gradual incremental increase to 2.8, but it gives you still a very great wide angle range and a nice bright aperture. When it comes to depth of field, of course, the longer the focal length anyway, the shallower the depth of field appears and the better compression. So if you really want great shallow depth of field, you probably wouldn't necessarily choose to insist on, say, the f2 at 35. You'd be better off shooting at the 100 to 150 mil range at f2.8, and you'll get excellent compression and a beautiful depth of field. So you've got a great package where you've got so many choices. Isn't that awesome? It works in video mode, because for video sometimes you want a bright aperture. You're inside, maybe you're in a church or some sort of function center, and the lighting might be quite poor. So to have f2 for 35 and 50 and so on for most of your video work, well, that's really an awesome advantage. And then of course to have the extra reach, if you're in a wedding scenario, for example, and the bride's coming down the aisle, you can start off zoomed in, you can then bring that back and open her up, and then you've got the whole crew in the shot when they're just about to approach the aisle. So I think it's a fantastic setup to have that versatility all in one lens without going, oh no, halfway through a shot I've got to swap over a different lens, and then I've got to put the other one back, and then I've got to put this one back on, and maybe they're all got different filter sizes, and your mind's going to explode. So there are times when the one lens that pretty much does everything is essential, and that's why I purchased this. I was actually very impressed with the science behind it and the design. It's a great thinking out of the box arrangement. So is it as optically as perfect, for example, as Nikon's S-line lenses? They're 24 to 70 and they're 70 to 200. Is it every bit as good as them? Well, I think it's probably slightly below that. But when I say slightly, I mean just marginally. Nothing that a little bit of tweaking in post with sharpness or texture or something wouldn't fix. So it is sharp, make no mistake, but some of these S-line lenses are on a different level of sharpness, aren't they? They're way up here, you know. It's very hard for any other lens to compete, and especially when you're putting a package together like this with so many options in it, well, something's got to give. But by no means, don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's not sharp, I'm just saying it may not be up to that excellent level of a specific lens that company's been building for 70 years, you know, and perfecting it over that time. So this is a relatively new design and release, and I'm sure that there will be new versions of it in the future. Maybe in the next 5 years I'll have a Mark IV version or something like that, and it'll be unbelievable. But at the moment this one's more than adequate, and I'm very happy with its performance. Now I'm going to show you a whole lot of test photos. So you'll see some outside scenery shots where I start at 35mm and I'll go gradually from 35 to 50 to 70 to 85 to 100, 120 to 150. And you'll see those incremental changes, and you'll get an idea of the zoom range and how it transitions into actually a photo. And some video as well, where I've going around the veranda and comfortably and casually walking around, bobbing in and out of focus and in and out of the zoom range and so on, just to so you can see whether it's grabbing focus or not efficiently in video. Now I believe it does extremely well. With photos it's absolutely rocket fast. You can go pop, 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 pop from far to close so quickly. And it has been engineered, specifically Tamron tell us, with a very high performance, high speed autofocus motor. They standing by it, they say it's excellent from my experience in the photos, and I think it is too. I think it's quite excellent. So we'll view those videos together later as well, where I'm in the veranda, and you can tell me what you think about the autofocus performance. What I've done there, just so you can know in advance, is I've got the Z9 filming, because it's got the most amazing autofocus, and that gives the Tamron a fair chance, doesn't it? And then I'm using the Z6 II to film the monitor that's on the back of the Z9. So I don't mean the little flip-out monitor, I'm talking about an actual external monitor. I have a 7-inch monitor that I'm looking at right now on top of my Z6, and it's filming that monitor, and you'll be able to see whether the little focus boxes is following me, and you'll be able to read all the details around the screen about all the settings that I'm using. So I just thought that might be interesting. I'm using that system because I just don't have an Atmos Ninja that I can record onto what the screen is doing, so I've had to improvise. I've done this before and it works, and I think it's going to be fine. Hey guys, how you going? It's Mark Hummer here. We're doing a little outside test for the video quality. We're using the new Tamron lens, the 35 to 150. I have it set at, I believe, around 50 mils. And what we're going to do, I've got a filter on it to make it so it's not too glary and bright, ND4. And I've got an LED light panel here to make sure I'm well illuminated, so it's able to catch my eye. So what we're going to do is try a bit of bobbing up and down, really. Looks a little bit silly, but it's a great test for just seeing if or not the camera can acquire the eye, and if it keeps acquiring the eye as I move around. So this is not really a Z9 test, because I know the camera is more than capable. It's really about the lens and how the lens performs united with the Z9. So let's have a little sample, shall we? I'll move around a bit. As you can see, I've got a lav mic on, so you can hear me no matter where I go. I'll come out of frame a few times, and then I'll come back in, see if it grabs me very quickly, see how close it can focus into. So follow me around. When it loses the eyes, does it lose me, or does it retain me, the memory? I'm always interested to see how quickly it grabs the eye. So when I walk out of frame and then I come back into the frame, how fast does it acquire the eye? Is it quick? I believe it should be, because most of the autofocus is really relevant to the camera, not the lens. The lens would have to be a real dud and a flat performer if it was the lens's fault. I'm yet to acquire a lens that doesn't perform very well on the Z9 with autofocus. Even the very inexpensive Viltrox lenses, they're doing extremely well with that. And they're quite a budget lens. I think they're a great lens value for money wise, but right now we're talking about the Tamron, and the Tamron isn't cheap. It's what, $2,200 Australian, and gives a great range, of course, and a great aperture. So I'm very excited about the potential of the convenience of the lens more than anything else. Really, it's a wedding photographer's dream, or an event photographer's dream lens. And you've got the prime end wide, and then you've got an excellent quality 70 to 200 like longer focal length, which is fantastic, and at a good 2.8 aperture at worst. I was very fortunate to have a whole lot of filters left over from previous lenses, like my 24-70 f 2.8. I had also the 50mm 1.2, and all these I think were 85 or 82mm filter threads. So I've kept all those filters, and of course now I can whack them straight on this lens, which itself is an 82mm filter, and makes it so much better value for me, because those filters at that size are actually quite expensive. Sorry, I couldn't get you a prettier model. That's all I had handy. The wife's out working today, so it was all a quiet time, I suppose. That was handy, wasn't it? When you've got some peace and you can just get on with it without too much disruption. Make use of the time wisely. Coming out of frame again. So we're just doing a take two on this now. We're coming in a bit of a tighter angle. So initially that was the 35mm, wide as it goes. Now we've just tightened it in slightly to 60mm, and that sort of gives us a range that way we can say, all right, it's not just one focal length the motors work well at, it works well, you know, across the zoom range. So this is 60mm now, a little bit tighter action, so it should be easy for me to disappear out of the scene a bit more. Pop back up again. I can't walk around too wide because I will go completely out of frame. I'm just doing that on purpose sometimes to see if it pops and finds the eye quickly. Nothing's changed as far as my intentional settings, but I do know that what will have changed is the f-stop. So we've probably gone from f2 now to 2.4. Now you'll see that on the back of the screen. You'll see all the details written down there. You'll see the sound levels, video settings, 4K, 25 frames a second. The B-roll footage that I'm filming in the monitor at the back of the camera, I have an aperture monitor, and that's being filmed by my Z6, and I'm using the 85mm Viltrox lens to film that monitor. So it's not a direct feed into the Z6 from that monitor, that's going into the Nikon Z9, but what we do have a situation is I can film the monitor, and that way we can cross over between the actual footage and then the footage relating to the Z6, and you can see that the focus box is always there and always finding me. So I think that should be a good and interesting look. I'm not sure on closest focus point here, but I think this is probably about as close as I'd want to get. Just disappear out of scene again and see when I pop up what happens. Should have found me pretty quickly. Now the sort of video work I do is such that I don't film a lot of high action, dynamic action, but I do have people strolling at weddings. They're walking down the aisle, they're at the park, strolling, holding hands, doing a little lap around the park. And so there is motion, but it's certainly not hugely dynamic. So all I need is something to be consistent. I don't need a super performer, but I'm told this lens has a wonderful, very powerful autofocus motor that acquires focuses accurately and quickly. And from what I've seen with photos, I believe it. It does extremely well with photos. So that should have been sufficient a test for now. Thank you very much for your help and time. But enough of that. Getting back to the actual images and so on I'll be showing you. I've got images. I went down to a place called Forest Lake, which is a very local park and lake area. A lot of wildlife there. I've got some bird photos that I was able to take, and also little lizards and various formations, trees, verandas, structure, and give you an idea of the whole operation of the photo element of the camera and its quality of image, which I think is very impressive. Then I came inside and I did some photos with controlled lighting conditions of some bottles, and what that does, it gives you a beautiful image of how sharp it can be. So there's some real sharpness tests there, and I'm sure you'll find that very interesting to compare the different focal lengths. I even compared it with other lenses, for example Viltrox lenses, and also the Nikon 50mm 1.8, which I think is like a good benchmark, because that is such a renowned sharp lens that everything else really sort of tries to catch up to that. So that'll be interesting to see the comparative look and just see if you can pick any significant difference. The other thing I did was use a macro adapter, and so that little macro ring adapter from Viltrox enabled me to do some macro photography with this new Tamron lens as well, and that was fantastic. I used about 100mm focal length, used the macro adapter, and I was able to get in really close to details on those bottles and show you the labels, and you'll see how amazing they look and how clean and sharp. So with something as simple as a little macro ring, and to make up for that zoom range where you've lost your width, I'm recommending a 20mm f2.8 Viltrox lens, because it's so lightweight and compact. Well, you're easily able to put that in the bag, you wouldn't even notice. And when you need an ultra wide, well, there it is. So to have something so small and compact with you that fills the gap, 20mm at 2.8 for those extra wide ends when you need them, that's going to be an excellent all-round package. It's really still one lens, because the 20mm is something you're only going to pull out on an odd occasion when you needed that massive group photo shot or large scenery vista, but that won't be all the time. But it's handy to have it with you if and when you need it, so you don't feel like you're short-handed. So in performance review of this lens, I think it's amazing. I'm very impressed. So I just want to give you an overview of that. Now, as I say, we are going to look at a lot of images, so please bear with me as that. There might be a bit of silence in between them. I might put some music on because it might seem a bit slow and long. But it's very important you see for yourself what the images actually look like. So I'll be sharing those with you. So here we are over Forest Lake, and we're overviewing it at 35mm. From there we move on to 50, and then we increase that up to 70mm, and we're incrementally going along. So now about 85, and then we go on to about 100mm. Very soon we'll move on to 135, and we'll eventually finish off at 150, and it gives you an idea of the range there nicely. Here we've got the water dragon, which is a fountain in the center of the lake. Started off at 35, of course. This is 50, now 85. And I just continually move on up the range until we hit about a 135 now, and then we get up to about 150 mils. And you can see the very good detail and sharpness there. Here we've got my dog Carla. She's a gorgeous little thing. She's at 35 initially, then 85 here, and then we move on, zoom into 150mm, and the second profile photo at 150. You see the background blur, looks quite good. Here we've got some shots of bottles using the Tamron. I've used two focal lengths of the Tamron to illustrate the clarity, and then we can move on to the Viltrox lens, 35mm 1.8 there. We've got the 50 1.8 Viltrox and the 85 1.8 Viltrox, and they're all just as sharp and as clean. There's the Nikon 50mm just thrown in there for comparison. And then I come indoors and we do some more detailed testing here. You can see what lenses we're using because it's written on the boxes just beside them, but a few Viltrox lenses there to start with, and then I moved on. Some of the features that I'm very impressed with the lens, and I'd like to talk you through those, is we'll start off with first, it does have, and you won't be able to pick it up necessarily looking at it in this light and this size, but it does have a little USB port for upgrading firmware. Now I'll bring a photo up on the screen to show you that a close-up, but that's a handy feature for upgrading in the future. What we also have is a lot of features on the lens. So here we have function buttons. They have 2 function buttons, which are fantastic. You can program them for whatever you need to do. And then we also have this here, which is a custom menu button. So you've got custom 1, custom 2, custom 3, and then you also have your focus. So you have manual focus and your autofocus button. Now that's often missing from a lot of lenses, but this one here being a premium lens, Tamron, do promote this as a premium product in their lines. It's probably one of the most expensive lenses they have, other than their extra long zooms. But this is a fantastic product to have all these button features and options and control. And there, of course, is your zooming ring, and you see the zoom come out, extension of the barrel there. You can see the length of that. It's not actually too much. It's actually not too bad, and it feels very nice. It feels very, very controlled and smooth. It's not jerky, and it doesn't come out on its own. So there's no lens creep. So if you're worried about lens creep, there's no lens creep at all. And to counteract any potential of that, if you're shaking around, lovely Tamron have provided you a lock button, so you can lock the lens into its focal range if you want to. So when you engage that, now I can't zoom it out. To fix that, again, you just adjust the little button here, and of course now I can zoom it out again. Focusing, for example, is very smooth. It's a linear focusing arrangement. It feels very smooth and well dampened. It's not something that even when you're holding the lens you necessarily move too easily, so that's quite handy. But it's the focus is at the front, and it's the larger of the 2 rings. Just something to keep in mind if you're used to focusing from the most closest to the camera. Well, if you're used to focusing from here, that's going to be a bit disorientating perhaps, but if you're using it all the time, look, let's face it, this lens here, because it does pretty much everything, because we're talking about 35 all the way to 150 and bright aperture, this is the lens that stays on the camera. This is not something you put on and off on occasion, like as of various primes. This lens here I'm expecting to keep on the camera all the time because it's so useful and versatile. I mean, what arrangement are you going to get involved in a hurry where that's not going to do the job for you? If you need to do a portrait, it's going to do that straight away. You want to take a photo or video of the kids in the backyard, then it's going to be able to go wide enough to do that. And if you want to take some detailed close-up snaps, it can also do that at 150mm. So it pretty much does everything, and just leave it on the damn camera. You don't have to take it on and off. And then the only time you ever take this one off is if you need something specific, like an ultra wide, or you're going birding and you're going to put my other lens on here, my other big zoom, the 150 to 600. Now you notice that's quite an interesting range. 150 to 600, and I'm holding in my hand. This one goes to 150. So everything from 35 to 600 mils covered in these 2 zoom lenses. So that's pretty awesome, isn't it? I'm quite loving that. So very happy that I have that range covered now, and there's no holes in my range, that everything is covered. So say you keep this one on, you only put something else on if it's specific for a particular task. As I say, if I was going birding, I'm not going to choose to use this, it's not long enough. I've got some bird photos, but it's hard work because you've got to sneak up really close to them. But unless you're doing something obscure, leave it on the camera all the time and it's ready to go. So I think that's a brilliant thing. The other thing you want to do with this lens, I was very happy that I had filters already, but I'm encouraging people to buy the 82mm filters. I have a whole range of these Hoya 82mm filters because I've owned 82mm filtered cameras before. Look, think about this one. I've owned the 24 to 70. 24 to 70 2.8, 82mm filters. The 50mm f1.2. 82mm filters. So I had purchased all these in the past for my Nikon Z mount lenses, the S lines, and I've had them and I've had to keep them now. And so I've got what, an ND4, an ND9, an ND16 and a circular polarizer, and it gives me all that filtration that I need without spending another $1. And unfortunately these 82mm filters are actually pretty expensive if you buy a decent brand, so I've saved myself several $100s there just by keeping those filters around, even though I wasn't sure if I was ever going to use them again. But holding on to these filters is always a great idea, and now if I choose to do video or I choose to do long exposure photography, I'm well covered. So don't forget to grab some filters because that makes it even more versatile. You only need the 82mm version. Now you can get something like a a circular ND filter that'll cover from ND4 to ND200 or something like that, and then you're covered for pretty much everything. Now that's an option. I prefer to get specific filters wherever possible, but that's just my choice. But am I happy with the lens? Yes, I am very happy. It's a perfect match for the Z9, size and weight. It feels very good. It feels very well balanced with a Z8 or a Z9, because I think because it's a weightier lens, you're going to want a weightier camera to sort of counterbalance that. Otherwise, I'll put it on the Z6, and let me tell you, it does feel a bit heavy forward. Now, you can get away with that, sure. I mean, I've had massive lenses like the 70 to 200 on my Z6 in the past, so I understand you can deal with it, but it just here, it balances and feels more comfortable with a heavier camera. So if you've got the Z8 or Z9, you are set to go with that. That's going to be a fantastic option. So that's really most of what I have to say today. I will say one other thing, though, that's not related to that Tamron lens, and that is that I think it's very important to appreciate when it comes to such things as sharpness. And I hear a lot of reviews of lenses, and they always waffle on for ages and ages about the sharpness this and the sharpness that. And I'm sorry, I've got to agree with a comment from Ken Rockwell, where he always introduces his videos and he'll say, sharpness is more to do with the photographer than it is the gear. And he's absolutely right. It doesn't really matter what lens you have, whether it be a Nikon, a Sony, a Canon, a Viltrox, whatever brand. It doesn't make any difference. They're all sharp these days, especially in the center of the frame. That main oval in the center is always going to be sharp. It's only how sharp it gets off to the corners, and really who cares? Who's paying attention to what's going on out here in the frame anyway? Most of the action is in that center area. So all modern lenses are sharp, regardless of whether they're an S-line lens or not an S-line, whether they're a cheap Viltrox lens or they're a very expensive top-end Sony, G-Master. It doesn't matter. They're all good these days. And of course, there's nothing you can't adjust in post. You can always add some texture, clarity, sharpness, and so on, contrast in post to improve the image anyway. You set yourself up a good preset. So let's say, for example, in context, we're talking about this Tamron. I can set a Tamron 35 to 150 preset up where the relevant necessary sharpnesses and contrasts and that are added in. And I don't have to worry about fiddling with sliders then. I just click on that Tamron preset in Lightroom, bang. Everything's as sharp as it could possibly be and necessary to be. It'll also fix any minor distortions and vignetting and so on. So get your settings right in camera. Pay attention to take your time getting focus. Don't just take one photo. When it comes to sharpness, it does pay not to assume every one shot was perfect. Doesn't matter how good the camera or lens is. Take a couple of shots, 2, 3 or so, and you can always fall back on the second shot if the first one didn't quite hit the mark. And that'll save you bacon many a times. So is this my little rant about sharpness? Don't obsess with your lens. More important, most likely, is your camera autofocus. So if you've got that going really well, you've got a brand new camera, for example, like a Z9, a Z8, Z6 III, the ZF. We're talking Nikon cameras here. Same is relevant to your Sony and Canon gear. Doesn't matter. But if it's a relatively modern camera, the autofocus will be amazing. It will get focus and it will hold focus. So just you can trust the camera, but take a few shots. Don't be scared to take a second backup one here and there just to cover yourself in case. But other than that, I thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed my little review of this new Tamron product. It was a great looking lens actually, and the technology behind it I think is very impressive. So you won't be disappointed. I know I'm not. There'll be a lot more photos and videos in the future. This is just my first week with this unit, so there's a lot in the future that I will share with you, and we'll continue this story then. So thank you for your time, guys. Have a lovely day.